Blood. I'm your co-host, Nathan.
And I'm Julie.
Tonight, we take a journey through two mortals' sordid affair with the silver screen creatures of the night.
Actually, it's just a podcast where we watch a vampire movie and chat about it.
This month, we watched the classic 1931 adaptation of Dracula, directed by Todd Browning, adapted from the 1924 play by Hamilton Deane, and dabbed on by Bela Lugosi, who is best known for his role as Luigi in the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
It stars Bela Lugosi.
Which brings us full circle around to Bella Swan.
Good jokes. It goes without saying that there will be spoilers and maybe some saucy language ahead, so brace yourself.
Now's a great time to pause, watch the film, then come right back to our tantalizing insights.
All right, Nathan, will you tell us the plot of Dracula?
The plot? There's a spooky old man, he likes to bite people.
Yeah, pretty much.
There you go. You know everything you need to know.
I think what we're most interested in is like the plot of the novel in comparison to the plot of the movie and how that's like a foundation for like all Dracula stories moving forward, like generally.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I think this film is genuinely a kind of turning point in vampire mythology as we begin to really diverge from a folkloric vampire into a fictional vampire movie, and this film really lays the foundation for what those powers are. What does a vampire look like? What does it act like? I don't think I'll be able to talk too much to the plot of the book because still haven't read that. I think you've read it, so you can provide me with some insights.
I've read
there.
most of it. I'll give you the comparisons as you go through the movie.
But let's dive into the plot of the movie because this really is a baseline for future Dracula movies and future vampire films. We open the film with Renfield, who's like a lawyer. I think he probably has a different dumb old-timey name for his job, and he's headed off to Dracula's castle, and every poor filthy peasant he meets along the way freaks out at the idea that he would go to Dracula's castle, but he trudges on with the confidence only a mediocre white man would know. Upon arriving to the castle, things are a little weird. His like final carriage ride there is driven by a bat. Definitely just a bat on some string. Big rubbery bat. But as it turns out, that Count Dracula greets him there and welcomes him to his castle. They have some conversation. Renfield's super excited to be helping Dracula pick out his new home in London. You know, Dracula wanted that big old castle, and Renfield found the perfect one. It's gonna be great. Renfield's completely oblivious to like the spookiness that is Dracula.
Like cobwebs everywhere.
Just armadillos skittering around.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the armadillos.
There's like no one else in the castle at all. He keeps saying that there's servants around to help, but it's really just an illusion put on by Dracula because it's really just him and his like wives that show up for one scene. But Renfield's like getting ready for bed. I think he opens like a window and a bat flies in or something like that, and then he passes out, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember.
But then Dracula's wives come down and they're like, "I'm gonna suck you blood-wise."
Yeah.
And then Dracula's like, "Be gone, he's mine," and bites him. And from there on out, Renfield is kind of a like under the control
it's like
of
his
Dracula.
familiar.
Yeah,
basically.
He's pretty much hypnotized by him and does his will. We next see them on a boat headed to London. Renfield's pretty much loco crazy at this point, eating rats and stuff and surviving. When they arrive in London, like the entire crew is dead. Just Renfield is alive, and he's sent off to an insane asylum, which wouldn't help anybody, but they tried their best back then, even though it probably wasn't their best. You know, we see Dracula go out on a night in the town and meet Renfield's betrothed.
No. So that's where you're getting the book and the movie confused. So in the book, instead of Renfield going to Transylvania to help Dracula move to England,
Yes.
It's Jonathan Harker.
Oh, that's right.
So Jonathan Harker is like the hero of the story, kind of, and he's betrothed to Mina Harker, who's friends with Lucy, and depending on which adaptation you're talking about, and I can't really keep them straight, they're somehow related to Dr. Seward, I think in this adaptation it's like her father or her uncle or something.
Honestly, I don't remember. We watched a Dracula musical pretty
Like
in close proximity, and it all gets a little muddy in there.
Together.
But he does go. He like goes to the theater and meets the three characters. He meets Harker, Lucy, and Mina, who's like his love reincarnate. It's not really expressed in this, but that's in other adaptations.
There's so many Draculas.
But he becomes like obsessed with Mina and has to have her, right? And so going forward, Lucy, who's Mina's good friend,
best friends, besties.
Yeah. Dracula sneaks into her room at night and bites her, and then
in the movie she's just like dead the next scene.
Yeah,
they were
not
like
much longer
gonna shoot a scene where it's like Lucy's whole storyline, but then they didn't, and they just cut it out.
Yep, they like try and save her. I think they give her a transfusion or something like that, but it's like dead. I think we at this point cut back to Renfield in the insane asylum, and he's like eating flies and spiders, and Professor Van Helsing shows up and is like, this is definitely vampires, and everybody's like, okay, those are a myth. Calm down, old man. This is the future. But to prove it, he like pulls out some wolfsbane, and Renfield recoils at the very idea of a plant being near him. But Van Helsing explains that wolfsbane in some countries is used to help repel the vampire, and this is definitive proof that it is vampires causing the recent tragedies. I think we then cut to like the next night, and Mina's wandering around the garden.
Yeah, she's being harassed by that rubber bat.
Yeah, and he attacks her, I think drinks her blood a little bit, and then she's found by the maid. Simultaneously, I think like we get a really weird newspaper headline thing explaining that like a woman in white is running around eating children, biting children, which is
in the movie?
Yeah,
okay.
It is. Because it's really weird. So this
we just watched it.
Yeah. So there's some like really big elements of silent film in this movie, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more in detail. But essentially, this director didn't do a lot of talkies.
Or what was it you just called it?
Noisies. As I can only imagine a man who's dedicated his life to cinema, and now they want to talk in them would call a movie with sound.
Yeah.
So there's some, right, they show a headline and it's woman terrorizes local children, which in the book is the blue fur lady.
Which is Lucy. So the like local urchins in the town are being stalked by Lucy, who's now in vampire form. And they call her the beautiful lady, but because they're British urchins, they can't say it right. So they call her the bloofer lady, which is hysterical. Yes. But yeah, Lucy's storyline is cut very short in this movie adaptation versus the book. And the Dracula's wives are cut very short in the movie as opposed to the book. There's a lot of streamlining, like tons and tons of streamlining. Like if you want to get down to the really bare bones plot of Dracula, the movie's like a good place to start, because like from A to B it's like the simplest version of the story.
They probably could have cut some stuff from
I mean, yeah, it's a really convoluted story.
We're getting into about 30 minutes of dudes standing around talking about what to do about Dracula.
Yeah, and Dracula's like in the room for most of the scenes.
Yeah, it's wild. Because pretty much from there, like Renfield escapes, right? But is still just hanging out with everybody, even though he's supposed to be in an insane asylum.
He's just
whatever.
Always there.
Dracula shows up and is just like hanging out because he wants to be friends with Mina. And they're all like, oh, you don't have a reflection. So what does Dracula do? Smashes that mirror and runs the hell out of there. What else would you do? Any sane person would react the same way. But essentially, I think Dracula returns a little bit after that and states that like Mina is him, and Van Helsing's like, no, I'm going to stop you. And they have this like stare off, and then Dracula tries to like hypnotize him.
It's so anticlimactic. Yeah. It's hilarious.
But literally Van Helsing just stands there. There's like no emotional response.
He like throws up a crucifix.
Yeah.
And Bela Lugosi does this like hysterically melodramatic like cape swoop where he's like ah. And it's just super funny.
Yeah. So at this point they're like very concerned for Mina, and Van Helsing's like, wear garlic, wear wolfsbane, don't let her out, don't do anything. We're gonna go kill Dracula or sit around and talk some more, who knows. But Mina is pretty heavily under Dracula's spell, and it like rips off the wolfsbane and is hanging out on the terrace, and then a little rubber bat comes flying around and it's just squeaking at her, and she's talking back, and her dumb boyfriend is like, what are you talking about? And then she attacks him under the orders of Dracula, but she's
a lady, so
yeah.
She can't overpower a strong man like Jonathan Harker.
Yeah.
It was
really
1931.
At that point, like, Mina confesses and is like, I've been bitten by Dracula and our love is over, Jonathan. We can't go on.
His name is actually John in the movie, which is funny because it's such a weird thing to change. He's like the other big part of the story that gets like cut away because he's been replaced by Renfield in the like beginning part in Transylvania, which I personally think is a good story choice. I think it's weird how shoehorned Renfield is in a lot of the other versions, and so like integrating him into the story better would mean him going to Transylvania in the beginning, but then Jonathan gets like the short end of the stick because he's in this one really only like the hero for the very end of the story.
Yeah, so from this point Mina gets kidnapped somehow. I don't really remember. It gets very loose here at the end. Mina gets kidnapped by Dracula. Renfield chases after them. Dracula thinks everybody else is following Renfield, so he kills Renfield. So sad. Shed a single tear for our homeboy Renfield. And then Harker and Van Helsing show up. Is there like even a fight? I don't know. They're like Dracula like runs away.
There's like a big dramatic staircase. Do you need a fight?
Yeah.
There's like a single spotlight and a bunch of big shadows, and they're on a staircase, and I think Dracula probably gets stabbed with a stake or something. And
yeah,
like the whole rest of the movie, it's just an anticlimax.
Sunrise is like really close, so Dracula's trying to get to his coffin because he has to sleep on his ground from where he was once killed or something along those lines. And essentially Van Helsing stakes him in the heart. Or something. And then Mina returns to normal and happy endings.
And happily ever
And that's
after.
like literally it.
Yeah, so the big difference with the ending is it's also truncated and simplified in the book. And this is the part of the book that I didn't read because I read it in like freshman year of high school and I have no attention span. But yeah, in the book, they go back to Transylvania. So basically, Mina's in this like half state where she's not quite a vampire yet, but she's transferred blood to Dracula and from Dracula, which means she can see into his mind.
Yeah, and it's very Harry Potter Voldemort-y.
Yeah, and they use that as a tool to track Dracula down at his castle in Transylvania and kill him there. But like one of the things that's interesting about this movie is that it doesn't really seem like it because it was made in 1931, but it's a contemporary, it's like a present day adaptation of the story, which is another big difference from the book. And the reason for that is because it was the Great Depression and adapting the book would have been too expensive.
Yeah. I mean, this movie was for sure filmed on a budget.
As like all old movies are. Like, I don't want to dunk on a movie too much from 1931, but this is not my favorite old movie. It's a little boring.
Yeah, for like how relatively fast things happen, it seems to take forever to get anywhere where it wants to go.
It's how long is the movie? Like 70 minutes or something?
Yeah, it's pretty quick. It's like an hour and a half maybe.
Yeah, it's short and it's not exciting. But Yeah, so it's actually an adaptation of the play version, which is for the same reason it's just too expensive to do the book. And at the time, they were worried that audiences would be distracted by like a score, because they thought that the
too damn noisy.
too damn
How
noisy.
are you gonna focus
in these films they call noisies? Yeah, they thought the audience would be like stuck on wondering where the music was coming from. So the entire movie basically has no music, and it really is a testament to how much music plays a role in horror films, because there's just like very, very little sense of suspense. Like, it's not anything lacking in Bela Lugosi's performance or the actor who plays Renfield's performance. Like, they're both really good. I don't know about everybody else, but whatever. But like the lighting and the sets and everything evokes this very spooky feeling, but there's just something missing. And it's definitely the score. It's like, just, you're watching the scene and you're like, that's it? They're just standing there? It's pretty odd.
Yeah, they definitely use like long gazes into each other's eyes as dramatic tension.
Yeah.
And it's just,
and
it doesn't do it for a modern audience.
They basically took like two little flashlights and put them straight into Bela Lugosi's eyes in order to create that effect. And then there's not a single shot of him blinking in the entire movie, which is actually pretty cool stuff. Like, they had a lot of the right ideas. It just isn't the full package because there wasn't a lot of predecessors to go off of that were really successful at being scary.
For sure.
This isn't the first adaptation of Dracula technically.
There was Nosferatu before, which was a unauthorized production.
Yeah. And so Bram Stoker's widow sued successfully, which is why we have very few complete copies of Nosferatu left. But besides that and a handful of other, spooky early silent films, this is really like breaking ground on vampires in the movies. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, it like launched Universal into this monster franchise that they tried to revive in modern years, which is wild.
Unsuccessfully. Which is kind of shocking because rebooted franchises have had a very good track record lately. It's just not the right time period, I think, to be rebooting from. Nobody living today has nostalgia about 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi.
I kind of do.
I mean,
I'm an outlier.
Yeah, the shooting of the film was kind of disastrous in a number of ways. The director was kind of having like a meltdown through most of it. Some of the actors anecdotally didn't really care about filming. The cinematographer directed part of it because the director wouldn't show up. At night on the same set, a whole different crew were filming like a Spanish language version of the same movie, which we have and we might watch for a later episode possibly. There was also the scene where Renfield is bitten by Dracula was like forbidden by the studio because of its homoerotic subtext. And it came, right? Classic. And it came with a memo stating that Dracula is only able to attack women. Those are the exact words on the memo. Which is like a lot to unpack.
The lengths they went to say no homo back in the day.
Oh my God. And just the idea that like that violence against women is inherently sexualized.
Oh yeah, it's extremely problematic.
The idea that any kind of violence that like this vampire is doing is like inherently sexualized is, I don't know, it's so loaded. There's so much.
I mean, you are biting at the neck. There's,
yep.
It's like kissing your lover. As long as they're not dudes.
Yep, as long as it's not Renfield. Who in my opinion has the best like performance in the movie. There's this really amazing shot, and I don't know why I single it out, but both times we've watched the film, we've watched it twice now, which is hilarious because we can't apparently remember what's in it. But there's this shot, and it's like this gorgeous pan down on like a passed out maid, and Renfield is like crawling up on her, and it's like the legitimately scariest part of the movie, and it's a testament to how close they were to like getting it, and then just like not quite.
An interesting fact about this production though is that while it's supposed to take place in Transylvania, pretty much all the like peasant extras are speaking Hungarian. They just figured that was foreign enough for American ears.
Isn't Bela Lugosi Hungarian?
No.
He is. Yeah, he's Hungarian. Right. And I know, I was reading about it because in Hungary, the movie was like derided because Hungarians were already so sick of vampire stories that they thought this was just like old-fashioned and played out, and they thought his performance was really bad, which is weird because he's like very celebrated, very iconic in this role. For sure. So different reception in his home country. But yeah, back to the armadillos. As I said, I was going to talk about
the armadillos wandering Dracula's castle.
Yeah, so in the beginning of the movie, in the crypt under Dracula's castle, there's a whole bunch of goofy critters. And it's a kind of a subject to debate. There's a lot of different theories and reasonings floating around for why there's armadillos. The one that I've seen the most is that armadillos just weren't a super well-known animal in 1931. So most like American audiences weren't familiar. And so they would have seen the armadillo as like a frightening, weird thing.
They are pretty spooky looking.
And then there's another theory that like the director had a personal fascination with them. I don't know how legitimate that is. There's also the fact that at the time censors didn't like rats. They thought they were inappropriate to show the public. So armadillos were an alternative to rats, I guess.
Bigger armor.
Like mega rats. And then also armadillos were sort of in rumor and folklore known for digging around in cemeteries, and they were associated with the dead, and people thought they were eating corpses. So they were kind of just like a spooky, weird animal back then. But then there's also possums. And I
love possums.
Yeah, possums.
Little Avril Lavigne's.
Which I think are most likely the like actual rat substitute.
Yeah. No, they're more rat-like than an armadillo.
For sure. But then there's also this extremely adorable little Jerusalem cricket, which is a like burrowing insect that's native to like the American Southwest and I think Mexico.
They look like big ants.
Yeah, they're really weird. But this little Jerusalem cricket comes out of a tiny coffin.
Oh, it's the cutest thing.
It's so cute. But yeah, for pretty much the same reason. It's a burrowing insect, so it's associated with
death and decay.
Death, I guess. Yeah.
Dracula's MO.
It's just so funny how all of these southwestern American critters are in his Transylvanian castle. It's just it doesn't it doesn't translate to today anymore. And I bet in 1931 it was very creepy crawly.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think it's still kind of creepy crawly. We just, as an audience, are like, oh, that's a possum. Like that's in America. That's an American possum. Like, calm down.
Yeah.
Do you have any more fun facts, or can we get into this vamp rating?
I'm pretty done with my trivia.
Excited to talk about these powers and all that vanity.
Let's get into our vamp assessment.
Vamp, vanity, appetite, mortality, and powers. Starting with vanity, Bela Lugosi looks good, but like I don't think he's super obsessed with it. I mean, maybe by their standards, he is dressed very formally.
Yeah,
right?
He's like a count. And I think that's something that a lot of people sort of miss with Dracula adaptations, because we just think of Dracula as being a vampire, but he is a count. Like, he's Count Dracula. He has a castle.
Yeah.
He's like local.
Yeah, and I don't think he's like necessarily
authority.
Dressed super out of place for the time, right? He's just dressed super fancy. I was actually having this thought as we were watching the movie, like if you were to write Dracula right now, like what would he be wearing that would be deemed like the upper crust of society, right?
Tacky Italian suit.
Or would it be like athleisure, like he's wearing Lululemon?
Oh my god, I love that. He's like a douchebag rich like tech guy or something who can't be bothered to like put on real
Actual
people
clothing,
clothes.
yeah. So I don't know, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah,
but he
no,
is
that's...
like, he doesn't really change his appearance throughout the film. Like we don't see him like get shrivelly and old as he doesn't drink blood or anything like that. He really is just Bela Lugosi throughout the film, which differs from the book, right? He's pretty crusty.
Yeah, he's definitely crusty in the book. He's when Jonathan meets him at the beginning, he's like an extremely elderly, decrepit man, and then he eats some peasants, and Jonathan's like shocked that he's looking younger and more vital. And then when they meet him again in London, he's like a young man, basically. Yeah. That doesn't happen.
All that sailor blood.
And I'm assuming that doesn't happen for budget reasons.
Yeah, it would be.
But I think Bela Lugosi at the time was pretty sexy.
Yeah, no, and I think
he's like a sex symbol.
The way the characters respond is that he is an attractive man.
For sure.
Is alluring.
Yeah, I don't get it really.
I don't get it either. It's not my type, but it's okay. They can have him 1930s.
Yeah.
So moving on to Appetite, because I don't really think there's much more to say about Vanity.
Yeah,
really
he eats women only.
Cape. I mean, he does attack Renfield.
Yeah, that's true.
So like the women only thing, I think they skirted it a little bit, but he is very obsessed with women.
Yes. Anyway, sorry, I kind of moved on to Appetite.
No,
do you want to talk about
good.
Vanity some more?
No. We're good. Appetite. Drinks human blood. They mention a lot with Renfield of him wanting blood of like rats and spiders and little things he can get his hands on. But as far as
Classic
Dracula
Renfield
goes, he doesn't really seem interested in the blood of other creatures besides humans. I don't know if that's just a dignity thing.
I don't think also that Renfield is full vampire.
Yeah, and that's like the point and
it's not really
conclusion
clear.
I'm drawing, right? He's like quarter vampire at the most.
Yeah.
He's just
it's
really
like in that weird in between state that Mina's in towards the end, where she's like been bitten and has received blood from Dracula, but is becoming a vampire still.
Yeah. And it doesn't go into any detail about, how long can he go without drinking blood? Does he... It just really doesn't provide any more detail than, like, he drinks blood occasionally. It doesn't really seem like a huge need. He's not, like, controlled by it. It doesn't feel like he has huge urges to drink blood. Just that it's like...
he's not a very motivated villain. Which
no, he just wants Mina.
Yeah. Who wouldn't?
No, literally anyone.
To what extent do they go over mortality? What kills him?
He's got a ton of weaknesses. Van Helsing is just like throwing everything out of his pockets. And he's like, you're weak to this, you're weak to this, you're weak to this. We talked about one already, the wolfsbane, which is like a plant or herb. Supposedly pretty smelly according to Mina. But that's it, like, will repel the vampire. They also talk about garlic. Crucifixes. There's a scene in the beginning where Renfield like cuts his finger on a paperclip or something. Dracula's like, I'm gonna get up in that, but his like crucifix falls out.
Yeah.
He like does the whole like vampire cape thing, like and retreats. And then there's that scene we also talked about with Van Helsing and Dracula with the crucifix and scaring him away. Really.
He's weak to sunlight as well.
Yes.
So he just like the classic gamut of stuff.
Yeah, weak to sunlight. One interesting one, which I think kind of gets like passed over in more modern tellings, is the idea that he has to sleep on the ground that he was buried in.
Yeah,
right?
They do talk about that. And I don't know if I've ever really seen an adaptation that talks about the consequences of not doing that.
Yeah, it's just that he's like compelled to return to the ground.
Yeah.
Where he was.
So it has
buried.
to be like hallowed earth. And so he like pulls the soil from the chapel under his castle and puts it into coffins, which is where the whole sleeping in coffins thing comes from.
Yep.
So that he can like transport himself across the ocean in a box, basically, full of native soil that is consecrated. It's so convoluted.
It's very convoluted.
And I get why people leave it out, because it doesn't. It's a lot.
It makes for a very geographically constrained vampire, and that's just not any fun for anybody.
Yeah, it's a lot of mechanics.
We want to see our vampires travel the world.
Powers.
Yeah.
This is a Weenie Hut Jr. vampire.
I don't know though. He does, like, just because they didn't have the budget to show some cool stuff doesn't mean he's a Weenie Hut Jr.
His power is he stands in rooms and he becomes a rubber bat. What?
Yeah, but we don't ever see it. So he does have the power to transform into a bat and maybe also a wolf. At
Implied,
least communicate as a wolf. He's able to like howl and talk to Renfield that way. And then.
Ooh.
And he also has like the power of hypnosis and suggestion. He tries it on. Well, he like really tries it on with Van Helsing, right? That's that whole stare down. He's like trying to like coerce him through just speaking to like subject to his will.
Right.
But Van Helsing has too strong of a will.
But the point there being that the hypnosis only works on women.
Yep.
Well, in Renfield.
As the movie would put it. Yeah. Renfield and those
and
of
women.
So
I don't know. Like this vampire does not strike me as powerful, in my opinion. Like whether or not you like are able to like actually add up his powers that are demonstrated, his vibe is not powerful.
No, he's not like flittering around a room all agile, like, right? He's slowly slinking around, being spooky. You don't really ever see him like exert huge feats of strength.
Yeah, he's not strong. He's not. He only attacks people who are already vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I think that's probably the main reason why he doesn't come across as very intimidating, is because he has so many opportunities to like get the upper hand in a situation or attack someone. Like in the scene with the mirror, like, he's been discovered. Why doesn't he just kill everyone in the room? Who fucking knows?
He's gotta be spooky. I do think the like vulnerability thing is playing into like being scary though, right? Because like, what's scarier than being attacked when you're most vulnerable and like you're just laying in your bed and all of a sudden some creepy old dude's sucking on your neck, right? So like I think it is still spooky, just not super terrifying in the way that we expect horror movies of our generation
I'll
to be.
concede that he's in the middle somewhere in terms of power.
He's very middle of the road. I think it is interesting that he does transformations, the like telepathy, talking with people as animals type of stuff, but then just like the weaknesses to like anything that Van Helsing can pull out of his pocket is pretty wild. So like overall, really very, very middle of the road vampire.
I would say lower towards the scale. Like tier. I don't know, like low tier sort of. He's like a base vampire. He's like the vampire standard upon which all other vampires have been escalated. Yeah,
it's definitely where like people who make vampire films take from, and then also they'll like and then add on to it, take a little bit away, but you always kind of come back to this base set and rule, whether you decide that crucifixes aren't your thing for your movie or holy water is your thing, that kind of stuff.
It's Dracula.
It's just Dracula. It's classical Dracula. I do think this is a really good movie, and like in terms of like if you're really vested in vampires, it's one that you should probably watch. I think it's up there in the pantheon of vampiric
It's a seminal
film.
Text.
But it's not amazing.
It's not amazing.
Maybe pour yourself a glass of wine.
Yeah, do that.
Grab a buddy. I don't know. Have fun with it. But it is, I don't know. I think it's a cornerstone of vampire film.
And we're going to be watching a lot of other Dracula films.
Yes.
So
we got
the
Keanu
important
Reeves.
Hell
we
yeah.
got, I don't even know who else. He's the
I don't
only
even
one
know who else.
Christopher Lee, I think, did
Yes,
some.
Christopher Lee a bunch of times. But yeah, so we're going to be, the like important thing about this film is that we're going to be referencing back to it constantly as a baseline, because that's like what it is.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate baseline for the vampire film.
Yeah, and I think, that's pretty fair. It inspired people to go on and make tons more vampire films.
Yeah. And if you think that Twilight's the first movie that made vampires sexy, you'd be very wrong, because it's this one.
I don't know. Is Edward sexy?
No. All right. Well,
poor Cedric Diggory.
It looks like dawn approaches.
That's going to be all for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed your stay. Next episode, we'll probably be discussing Dracula Untold. Until then, I am Nathan.
And I'm Julie.
For all our vampire listeners out there, remember to stay out of the sun.
Bye.